What's up, everyone? It is Andrew here. I'm here in my new studio talking about something that's probably going to be a hard decision for a lot of you out there, which is whether or not you should choose the iPad Air, the new 2020, or the 2020 iPad Pro. It is a hard decision, and we're going to break it down in this video, comparing one versus the other. We now have benchmarks of the new iPad Air. We've obviously have benchmarks of our iPad Pros, so let's go ahead, break all these down, go through the differences, and try to help you decide iPad Air or iPad Pro. Okay guys, time for some real talk. These two devices are remarkably similar, yet there are a lot of important details that'll separate them out. So we're going to go through those details and through the actual benchmarks to give you a good idea on which way may be best to go for you, if those differences are in fact important. So obviously, as you can tell, these things look remarkably similar. Both of the devices have an updated design, and they very much look similar to one another. Of course, you have a 10.9-inch iPad Air versus the 11-inch iPad Pro. The iPad Pros also have a larger 12.9-inch model, but if you're opting for the 12.9-inch, you only have the Pro to choose from. So in this video, we're really going to focus on that 10.9 versus the 11-inch Pro. So screen size there is a small difference, 10.9 versus 11, but they both feature liquid retina displays. One small difference is that the Pros offer a 600 nit brightness, whereas the iPad Air only goes up to 500 nits. So you can get a slightly brighter display with the iPad Pro. Additionally, the iPad Pro features ProMotion. ProMotion is where the iPad will automatically speed up the frame rate as you're interacting with it to create a more natural feel. You're going to notice when you're scrolling through a page or scrubbing through a video, anything where there's kind of a lot of content moving at once, it eats up the battery a little bit more, but it makes the iPad feel more natural as you interact with it. So that won't be there on the iPad Air. Another difference on the new iPads is going to be cameras. If you've been living under a rock and haven't noticed, the current generation iPad Pro has a few cameras on the back. There's a standard wide-angle lens, then there is an ultra-wide lens, so a 12 megapixel wide-angle lens and a 10 megapixel ultra-wide-angle lens. It also has a LiDAR camera or LiDAR scanner there on the back to capture depth information. So 2+ LiDAR on the iPad Pros. The iPad Air, on the other hand, only has a single camera. It's the same 12 megapixel wide-angle lens that we have here on the iPad Pros. So 12 megapixel wide-angle camera on both of them, but of course you also have the ultra-wide camera on the new iPad Pros, and it can capture video at up to 4K at 60 frames per second on that ultra-wide lens. Looking at the front of the iPad Pro, of course, it's using Face ID, so it has the true depth camera system. It's a 7 megapixel camera system there, but the iPad Air also has a 7 megapixel camera on the front, though it doesn't have the full true depth camera system. Now, instead of true depth for Face ID, it is instead using Touch ID, so that's another difference. Face ID to authenticate seamlessly on the iPad Pros, and Touch ID integrated into the power button there, the sleep wake button on the new iPad Airs. Now, some people may prefer Touch ID, some people may prefer Face ID. We prefer Face ID because it's a little bit more seamless and natural, and when we're using our iPads, we tend to be home or at work where we don't have to wear masks. Face ID on your phone is a little bit different because you're wearing a mask more often when you're out, and it makes it more frustrating, and sometimes Touch ID may be better there. But for iPad, we really do like Face ID, but I know some of you out there still like Touch ID, so of course the new iPad Air may be the way to go just because it has Touch ID with that liquid retina display on the front and then Touch ID there on the power button. The biggest change I want to talk about though is processors. This is huge. This is the key to the whole thing in my opinion. The new A14 processor on the iPad Air or the A12Z Bionic processor on the current iPad Pro. It is a difference, and that I think could be the deciding factor for a lot of people out there. But real quick, before we talk about the processors, I have to thank our sponsor for this video, Paperlike. Paperlike creates essentially a screen protector for your iPad Pro, but it does it with a matte finish that feels incredible. It is easy to put on and gives you a real paper-like experience when interacting with your iPad. It reduces the drag of that glass display, so it's more fun to use with your finger, but it's even better with the Apple Pencil. You can sketch, draw, take notes, and it all feels more natural and more paper-like on your iPad surface. Not only that, but it reduces glare on your display as well. I have been putting Paperlike on my iPads for a while now, and I absolutely love them. So if you are getting either a new iPad Pro, a new iPad Air, or you're watching this on your iPad now, and you want to grab a Paperlike screen protector, go ahead and do it down below in the description. So back to those processors. There really is a difference, and it's crazy because for the first time, the iPad Air is actually more powerful than the iPad Pros. So let's go ahead and look at those Geekbench numbers. Looking at the iPad Air, in leaked benchmarks that have surfaced online, we're seeing a single core score of 1583 and a multi-core score of 4198. And that's showing up as a 6-core processor. So that's what we're seeing on the iPad Air. But our iPad Pro, which is running the A12Z Bionic processor, which is an 8-core chip, we're seeing single core scores there of 1117 and 4690. So that is a better single core score by quite a bit for the iPad Air. And the multi-core score is only slightly behind on that iPad Air. And the reason is because there's 2 additional cores in that A12Z Bionic processor, because it's the A12Z Bionic processor which has the additional graphics cores tacked on there. So that is why there's a better multi-core score on the current generation iPad Pros, even though the single cores by themselves are slower. Now, that is important for a few reasons. Most tasks that you're going to do are single core operations, so you're going to get that improved speed on the iPad Air over the iPad Pros. Now, you will notice some differences when it comes to multi-core tasks that are more taxing on the processor. The new iPad Air is slightly below the current generation iPad Pros for those multi-core tasks. But if we look at the Metal scores using the compute benchmark of Geekbench 5.2, we see a 12,571 for the iPad Air, and 11,665 is what we're scoring here on our iPad Pros. You compare that, and we're actually getting a better graphics score, even with 2 fewer processors there, 2 fewer cores on the iPad Air. So the iPad Air has better graphics performance than the current generation iPad Pros. To me, that speaks volumes. Between the better single core operations and better graphics, I think I would lean, if I'm looking solely at performance, towards the iPad Air. There still are other differences though to touch on. The iPad Pros actually have a 4-speaker design, even though the iPad Air has 4 vents along its side on the top and the bottom. There's actually only 2 speakers inside of there, and they're just channeled to both of those vents. So there's a true 4-speaker design on the iPad Pro, so you should get better sound. There's also additional microphones. So there are 5 studio quality microphones on the iPad Pros and only 2 microphones on the iPad Airs. So if you're doing any audio recording or you actually are filming with your iPad, that is one difference you're going to note. The iPad Air comes with a 20-watt USB-C charger, whereas the iPad Pros, both of them, both the smaller and the larger ones, come with a 18-watt. So you're getting a faster 20-watt charger on the iPad Air versus the iPad Pros. I'm sure when Apple updates the iPad Pros, it'll include a quicker 20-watt charger, but at the moment, you actually get a faster charger with the iPad Air. Then, of course, we have capacity. The iPad Air comes in 64 and 256 gig sizes, whereas the iPad Pros come in 128. That's where they start out at. 256, 512, and 1 terabyte. So if you need more than 256, you're going to have to go with the iPad Pro because you have that 512 and 1 terabyte options. You simply don't have those on the Air. Finally, the colors. This is honestly a big thing for a lot of people. Not many people put covers on their iPads. And with the iPad Air, you have 5 fun colors to choose from. Your normal silver and space gray, but you also have rose gold, green, and sky blue, where the iPad Pros only come in silver and space gray. So if you want something fun and bright and flashy, that's gonna be the iPad Air. Otherwise, there is so much the same between these guys. Similar design we've already seen. Both have liquid retina displays. Both are using USB-C. Both support the 2nd generation Apple Pencil. All of that is going to be equal across the board. The iPad Air also supports the Magic Keyboard, so there's a Magic Keyboard to go along with it. So that boils down to a $200 difference between these two guys. And honestly, I think you do get a lot for the money. $200 more, you're going from 64 to 128 gigs of storage just to start. You're also getting 5 microphones versus 2, 4 speakers versus 2. You're getting ProMotion on the display. You're getting an additional camera on the back. You're getting Face ID to unlock it. You're getting the LiDAR scanner on there. There are quite a few differences and the better multi-core performance. But again, the iPad Air, it is fun. It is new. The Touch ID on there is awesome. I love that it's integrated right into the button as you wake it up. You have better performance on the single core and graphics test on that iPad Air. You're getting a faster charger in the box, and of course it comes in a bunch of cool colors. So if you don't care about those few small changes between the Air and the Pro, the Air is going to be where it's at for a lot of people. I think the current generation Pro, don't buy this thing. You should go for the Air, or you should wait for an updated version of the iPad Pro. iPad Pro is great, but right now it is not all it can be. We're going to see a new iPad Pro very soon, and honestly, the iPad Air is a pretty fantastic device. So if you're looking to buy an iPad now, go for the Air. Let me know what you guys think. Go ahead and find me on Twitter at Andrew_OSU. Pick up any of your new iPads, the iPad Air or the iPad Pro down below in the description. And thank you to our sponsor again, Paperlike. Find their information down below in the description.